Late in the evening of the 16th of February, 1879, after a rough voyage which lasted 32 days, joyful exclamations were heard everywhere on deck. "Have you seen the lighthouse?" There it is at last, the Bombay lighthouse. Cards, books, music, everything was forgotten. Everyone rushed on deck. The moon had not risen as yet, and in spite of the starry tropical sky, it was quite dark. The stars were so bright that at first it seemed hardly possible to distinguish, far away amongst them, a small fiery point lit by earthly hands. The stars winked at us like so many huge eyes in the black sky, on one side of which shone the Southern Cross. At last we distinguished the lighthouse on the distant horizon. It was nothing but a tiny fiery point diving in the phosphorescent waves. The tired travellers greeted it warmly. The rejoicing was general. What a glorious daybreak followed this dark night. The sea no longer tossed our ship. Under the skilled guidance of the pilot who had just arrived, and whose bronze form was so sharply defined against the pale sky, our steamer, breathing heavily with its broken machinery, slipped over the quiet, transparent waters of the Indian Ocean straight to the harbour. We were only 4 miles from Bombay, and to us, who had trembled with cold only a few weeks ago in the Bay of Biscay, which has been so glorified by many poets and so heartily cursed by all sailors, our surroundings simply seemed a magical dream. After the tropical nights of the Red Sea and the scorching hot days that had tortured us since Aden, we, people of the distant north, now experienced something strange and unwanted, as if the very fresh soft air had cast its spell over us. There was not a cloud in the sky, thickly strewn with dying stars. Even the moonlight, which till then had covered the sky with its silvery garb, was gradually vanishing, and the brighter grew the rosiness of dawn over the small island that lay before us in the east. The paler in the west grew the scattered rays of the moon that sprinkled with bright flakes of light the dark wake our ship left behind her, as if the glory of the west was bidding goodbye to us, while the light of the east welcomed the newcomers from far-off lands. Brighter and bluer grew the sky, swiftly absorbing the remaining pale stars one after the other, and we felt something touching in the sweet dignity with which the Queen of Night resigned her rights to the powerful usurper. At last, descending lower and lower, she disappeared completely. And suddenly, almost without interval between darkness and light, the red-hot globe, emerging on the opposite side from under the cape, leant his golden chin on the lower rocks of the island and seemed to stop for a while, as if examining us. Then, with one powerful effort, the torch of day rose high over the sea and gloriously proceeded on its path, including in one mighty fiery embrace the blue waters of the bay, the shore and the islands with their rocks and coconut forests. His golden rays fell upon a crowd of Parsees, his rightful worshippers, who stood on shore raising their arms towards the mighty Eye of Ormuzd. The sight was so impressive that everyone on deck became silent for a moment. Even a red-nosed old sailor, who was busy quite close to us over the cable, stopped working, and clearing his throat, nodded at the sun. Moving slowly and cautiously along the charming but treacherous bay, we had plenty of time to admire the picture around us. On the right was a group of islands with Garipuri or Elephanta, with its ancient temple, at their head. Garipuri translated means the town of caves, according to the Orientalists, and the town of purification, according to the native Sanskrit scholars. This temple, cut out by an unknown hand in the very heart of a rock resembling porphyry, is a true apple of discord amongst the archaeologists, of whom none can as yet fix, even approximately, its antiquity. Elephanta raises high its rocky brow, all overgrown with secular cactus, and right under it, at the foot of the rock, are hollowed out the chief temple and the 2 lateral ones. Like the serpent of our Russian fairy tales, it seems to be opening its fierce black mouth to swallow the daring mortal who comes to take possession of the secret mystery of Titan. Its 2 remaining teeth, dark with time, are formed by 2 huge pillars at the entrance, sustaining the palate of the monster. How many generations of Hindus, how many races have knelt in the dust before the Trimurti, your threefold deity, O Elephanta? How many centuries were spent by weak man in digging out in your stone bosom this town of temples and carving your gigantic idols? Who can say? Many years have elapsed since I saw you last, ancient, mysterious temple, and still the same restless thoughts, the same recurrent questions vex me snow as they did then, and still remain unanswered. In a few days we shall see each other again. Once more I shall gaze upon your stern image, upon your three huge granite faces, and shall feel as hopeless as ever of piercing the mystery of your being. This secret fell into safe hands 3 centuries before ours. It is not in vain that the old Portuguese historian Dom Diego de Cuta boasts that the big square stone fastened over the arch of the pagoda with a distinct inscription, having been torn out and sent as a present to the King Dom Juan III, disappeared mysteriously in the course of time, and adds, further, close to this big pagoda there stood another, and farther on even a third one, the most wonderful of all in beauty, incredible size, and richness of material. All those pagodas and caves have been built by the kings of Canada, the most important of whom was Bonazur, and these buildings of Satan our Portuguese soldiers attacked with such vehemence that in a few years one stone was not left upon another. And worst of all, they left no inscriptions that might have given a clue to so much. Thanks to the fanaticism of Portuguese soldiers, the chronology of the Indian cave temples must remain forever an enigma to the archaeological world, beginning with the Brahmans, who say Elephanta is 374,000 years old, and ending with Ferguson, who tries to prove that it was carved only in the 12th century of our era. Whenever one turns one's eyes to history, there is nothing to be found but hypotheses and darkness. And yet Garipuri is mentioned in the epic Mahabharata, which was written, according to Colebrook and Wilson, a good while before the reign of Cyrus. In another ancient legend, it is said that the temple of Trimurti was built on Elephanta by the sons of Pandu, who took part in the war between the dynasties of the sun and the moon, and belonging to the latter, were expelled at the end of the war. The Rajputs, who are the descendants of the first, still sing of this victory, but even in their popular songs there is nothing positive. Centuries have passed and will pass, and the ancient secret will die in the rocky bosom of the cave still unrecorded. On the left side of the bay, exactly opposite Elephanta, and as if in contrast with all its antiquity and greatness, spreads the Malabar Hill, the residence of the modern Europeans and rich natives. Their brightly painted bungalows are bathed in the greenery of banyan, Indian fig, and various other trees, and the tall and straight trunks of coconut palms cover with the fringe of their leaves the whole ridge of the hilly headland. There, on the southwestern end of the rock, you see the almost transparent, lace-like government house, surrounded on 3 sides by the ocean. This is the coolest and the most comfortable part of Bombay, fanned by 3 different sea breezes. The island of Bombay, designated by the natives Mumbai, received its name from the goddess Mamba, in Marathi Mahima, or Amba Mama, and Amma, according to the dialect, a word meaning literally, the Great Mother. Hardly 100 years ago, on the site of the modern esplanade, there stood a temple consecrated to Mamba Devi. With great difficulty and expense they carried it nearer to the shore, close to the fort, and erected it in front of Baleshwara, the Lord of the Innocent, one of the names of the god Shiva. Bombay is part of a considerable group of islands, the most remarkable of which are Salsetta, joined to Bombay by a mole, Elephanta, so named by the Portuguese because of a huge rock cut in the shape of an elephant 35 feet long, and Trombay, whose lovely rock rises 900 feet above the surface of the sea. Bombay looks, on the maps, like an enormous crayfish, and is at the head of the rest of the islands. Spreading far out into the sea its 2 claws, Bombay Island stands like a sleepless guardian watching over his younger brothers. Between it and the continent, there is a narrow arm of a river, which gets gradually broader and then again narrower, deeply indenting the sides of both shores, and so forming a haven that has no equal in the world. It was not without reason that the Portuguese, expelled in the course of time by the English, used to call it Buona Bahia. In a fit of tourist exaltation, some travellers have compared it to the Bay of Naples, but, as a matter of fact, the one is as much like the other as a lazzaroni is like a coulis. The whole resemblance between the former consists in the fact that there is water in both. In Bombay, as well as in its harbour, everything is original and does not in the least remind one of southern Europe. Look at those coasting vessels and native boats. Both are built in the likeness of the seabird sat, a kind of kingfisher. When in motion, these boats are the personification of grace, with their long prows and rounded poops. They look as if they were gliding backwards, and one might mistake for wings the strangely shaped long lateen sails, their narrow angles fastened upwards to a yard. Filling these two wings with the wind, and careening, so as almost to touch the surface of the water, these boats will fly along with astonishing swiftness. Unlike our European boats, they do not cut the waves, but glide over them like a seagull. The surroundings of the bay transported us to some fairyland of the Arabian Nights. The ridge of the Western Ghats, cut through here and there by some separate hills almost as high as themselves, stretched all along the eastern shore. From the base to their fantastic rocky tops, they are all overgrown with impenetrable forests and jungles inhabited by wild animals. Every rock has been enriched by the popular imagination with an independent legend. All over the slope of the mountain are scattered the pagodas, mosques, and temples of numberless sects. Here and there, the hot rays of the sun strike upon an old fortress, once dreadful and inaccessible, now half ruined and covered with prickly cactus. At every step some memorial of sanctity. Here a deep vihara, a cave cell of a Buddhist bhikshu saint. There a rock protected by the symbol of Shiva, further on a Jaina temple, or a holy tank, all covered with sedge and filled with water, once blessed by a Brahmin and able to purify every sin, all indispensable attribute of all pagodas. All the surroundings are covered with symbols of gods and goddesses. Each of the 330 millions of deities of the Hindu pantheon has its representative in something consecrated to it, a stone, a flower, a tree, or a bird. On the west side of the Malabar Hill, peeps through the trees, Valakeshvara, the temple of the Lord of Sand. A long stream of Hindus moves towards this celebrated temple, men and women, shining with rings on their fingers and toes, with bracelets from their wrists up to their elbows, clad in bright turbans and snow-white muslins, with foreheads freshly painted with red, yellow, and white, holy sectarian signs. The legend says that Rama spent here a night on his way from Ayodhya, Oudh, to Lanka, Ceylon, to fetch his wife Sita, who had been stolen by the wicked king Ravana. Rama's brother Lakshman, whose duty it was to send him daily a new lingam from Benares, was late in doing so one evening. Losing patience, Rama erected for himself a lingam of sand. When at last the symbol arrived from Benares, it was put in a temple, and the lingam erected by Rama was left on the shore. There it stayed during long centuries, but at the arrival of the Portuguese, the Lord of Sand felt so disgusted with the Feringhi, foreigners, that he jumped into the sea, never to return. A little farther on there is a charming tank called Vanatirtha, or the Point of the Arrow. Here Rama, the much-worshipped hero of the Hindus, felt thirsty and, not finding any water, shot an arrow, and immediately there was created a pond. Its crystal waters were surrounded by a high wall, steps were built leading down to it, and a circle of white marble dwellings was filled with Dwija, twice-born, Brahmins. India is the land of legends and of mysterious nooks and corners. There is not a ruin, not a monument, not a thicket, that has no story attached to it. Yet, however they may be entangled in the cobweb of popular imagination, which becomes thicker with every generation, it is difficult to point out a single one that is not founded on fact. With patience, and still more, with the help of the learned Brahmins, you can always get at the truth, when once you have secured their trust and friendship. The same road leads to the temple of the Parsi fire worshippers. At its altar burns an unquenchable fire, which daily consumes hundredweights of sandalwood and aromatic herbs. Lit 300 years ago, the sacred fire has never been extinguished, notwithstanding many disorders, sectarian discords, and even wars. The Parsis are very proud of this temple of Zarathustra, as they call Zoroaster. Compared with it, the Hindu pagodas look like brightly painted Easter eggs. Generally, they are consecrated to Hanuman, the monkey god, and the faithful ally of Rama, or to the elephant-headed Ganesha, the god of the occult wisdom, or to one of the Devis. You meet with these temples in every street. Before each there is a row of peepals, ficus religiosa, centuries old, which no temple can dispense with, because these trees are the abode of the elementals and the sinful souls. All this is entangled, mixed, and scattered, appearing to one's eyes like a picture in a dream. 30 centuries have left their traces here. The innate laziness and the strong conservative tendencies of the Hindus, even before the European invasion, preserved all kinds of monuments from the ruinous vengeance of the fanatics, whether those memorials were Buddhist or belonged to some other unpopular sect. The Hindus are not naturally given to senseless vandalism, and a phrenologist would vainly look for a bump of destructiveness on their skulls. If you meet with antiquities that, having been spared by time, are nowadays either destroyed or disfigured, it is not they who are to blame, but either Mussulmans or the Portuguese under the guidance of the Jesuits. At last we were anchored, and in a moment were besieged, ourselves as well as our luggage, by numbers of naked skeleton-like Hindus, Parsis, Moguls, and various other tribes. All this crowd emerged, as if from the bottom of the sea, and began to shout, to chatter, and to yell, as only the tribes of Asia can. To get rid of this Babel confusion of tongues as soon as possible, we took refuge in the first bunderboat, and made for the shore. Once settled in the bungalow awaiting us, the first thing we were struck with in Bombay was the millions of crows and vultures. The first are, so to speak, the county council of the town, whose duty it is to clean the streets, and to kill one of them is not only forbidden by the police, but would be very dangerous. By killing one you would rouse the vengeance of every Hindu, who is always ready to offer his own life in exchange for a crow's. The souls of the sinful forefathers transmigrate into crows, and to kill one is to interfere with the law of karma and to expose the poor ancestor to something still worse. Such is the firm belief, not only of Hindus, but of Parsis, even the most enlightened amongst them. The strange behaviour of the Indian crows explains, to a certain extent, this superstition. The vultures are, in a way, the grave diggers of the Parsis, and are under the personal protection of the Farvardania, the angel of death, who soars over the Tower of Silence, watching the occupations of the feathered workmen. The deafening caw of the crows strikes every newcomer as uncanny, but after a while is explained very simply. Every tree of the numerous cocoa-nut forests round Bombay is provided with a hollow pumpkin. The sap of the tree drops into it and, after fermenting, becomes a most intoxicating beverage, known in Bombay under the name of toddy. The naked toddy wallahs, generally half-caste Portuguese, modestly adorned with a single coral necklace, fetch this beverage twice a day, climbing the 150-feet-high trunks like squirrels. The crows mostly build their nests on the tops of the coconut palms and drink incessantly out of the open pumpkins. The result of this is the chronic intoxication of the birds. As soon as we went out in the garden of our new habitation, flocks of crows came down heavily from every tree. The noise they make whilst jumping about everywhere is indescribable. There seemed to be something positively human in the positions of the slyly bent heads of the drunken birds, and a fiendish light shone in their eyes while they were examining us from foot to head. We occupied 3 small bungalows, lost, like nests, in the garden. their roofs literally smothered in roses blossoming on bushes 20 feet high, and their windows covered only with muslin instead of the usual panes of glass. The bungalows were situated in the native part of the town, so that we were transported all at once into the real India. We were living in India, unlike English people, who are only surrounded by India at a certain distance. We were enabled to study her character and customs, her religion, superstitions and rites, to learn her legends, in fact, to live among Hindus. Everything in India, this land of the elephant and the poisonous cobra, of the tiger and the unsuccessful English missionary, is original and strange. Everything seems unusual, unexpected, and striking, even to one who has travelled in Turkey, Egypt, Damascus, and Palestine. In these tropical regions, the conditions of nature are so various that all the forms of the animal and vegetable kingdoms must radically differ from what we are used to in Europe. Look, for instance, at those women on their way to a well through a garden, which is private and at the same time open to anyone, because somebody's cows are grazing in it. To whom does it not happen to meet with women, to see cows, and admire a garden? Doubtless these are among the commonest of all things, but a single attentive glance will suffice to show you the difference that exists between the same objects in Europe and in India. Nowhere more than in India does a human being feel his weakness and insignificance. The majesty of the tropical growth is such that our highest trees would look dwarfed compared with banyans, and especially with palms. A European cow, mistaking at first sight her Indian sister for a calf, would deny the existence of any kinship between them, as neither the mouse-coloured wool, nor the straight goat-like horns, nor the humped back of the latter would permit her to make such an error. As to the women, each of them would make any artist feel enthusiastic about the gracefulness of her movements and drapery. But still, no pink and white stout Anna Ivanovna would condescend to greet her. Such a shame, God forgive me, the woman is entirely naked. This opinion of the modern Russian woman is nothing but the echo of what was said in 1470 by a distinguished Russian traveller, the sinful slave of God, Athanasius, son of Nikita from Tver, as he styles himself. He describes India as follows: "This is the land of India. Its people are naked, never cover their heads, and wear their hair braided. Women have babies every year. Men and women are black. Their prince wears a veil round his head and wraps another veil round his legs. The noblemen wear a veil on one shoulder, and the noblewomen on the shoulders and round the loins, but everyone is barefooted. The women walk about with their hair spread and their breasts naked. The children, boys and girls, never cover their shame until they are 7 years old." This description is quite correct, but Athanasius Nikita's son is right only concerning the lowest and poorest classes. These really do walk about, covered only with a veil, which often is so poor that, in fact, it is nothing but a rag. But still, even the poorest woman is clad in a piece of muslin at least 10 yards long. One end serves as a sort of short petticoat, and the other covers the head and shoulders when out in the street, though the faces are always uncovered. The hair is erected into a kind of Greek chignon. The legs up to the knees, the arms and the waist are never covered. There is not a single respectable woman who would consent to put on a pair of shoes. Shoes are the attribute and the prerogative of disreputable women. When, some time ago, the wife of the Madras governor thought of passing a law that should induce native women to cover their breasts, the place was actually threatened with a revolution. A kind of jacket is worn only by dancing girls. The government recognized that it would be unreasonable to irritate women, who very often are more dangerous than their husbands and brothers, and the custom, based on the law of Manu, and sanctified by 3,000 years' observance, remained unchanged. For more than 2 years before we left America, we were in constant correspondence with a certain learned Brahman, whose glory is great at present, 1879, all over India. We came to India to study, under his guidance, the ancient country of Aryas, the Vedas, and their difficult language. His name is Dayanand Saraswati Swami. Swami is the name of the learned anchorites, who are initiated into many mysteries unattainable by common mortals. They are monks who never marry, but are quite different from other mendicant brotherhoods, the so-called sannyasi and Hossein. This Pandit is considered the greatest Sanskritist of modern India and is an absolute enigma to everyone. It is only 5 years since he appeared on the arena of great reforms, but till then he lived, entirely secluded in a jungle, like the ancient gymnosophists mentioned by the Greek and Latin authors. At this time he was studying the chief philosophical systems of the Aryavata and the occult meaning of the Vedas with the help of mystics and anchorites. All Hindus believe that on the Bhadranath Mountains, 22,000 feet above the level of the sea, there exist spacious caves, inhabited now for many thousand years by these anchorites. Bhadranath is situated in the north of Hindustan on the river Bishagunj and is celebrated for its temple of Vishnu right in the heart of the town. Inside the temple there are hot mineral springs, visited yearly by about 50,000 pilgrims who come to be purified by them. From the first day of his appearance, Dayanand Saraswati produced an immense impression and got the surname of the Luther of India. Wandering from one town to another, today in the south, tomorrow in the north, and transporting himself from one end of the country to another with incredible quickness, he has visited every part of India, from Cape Comorin to the Himalayas, and from Calcutta to Bombay. He preaches the one deity and, Vedas in hand, proves that in the ancient writings there was not a word that could justify polytheism. Thundering against idol worship, the great orator fights with all his might against caste, infant marriages, and superstitions. Chastising all the evils grafted on India by centuries of casuistry and false interpretation of the Vedas, he blames for them the Brahmins, who, as he openly says before masses of people, are alone guilty of the humiliation of their country, once great and independent, now fallen and enslaved. And yet Great Britain has in him not an enemy, but rather an ally. He says openly, "If you expel the English, then, no later than tomorrow, you and I and everyone who rises against idol worship will have our throats cut like mere sheep. The Mussulmans are stronger than the idol worshippers, but these last are stronger than we." The Pandit held many a warm dispute with the Brahmans, those treacherous enemies of the people, and has almost always been victorious. In Benares, secret assassins were hired to slay him, but the attempt did not succeed. In a small town of Bengal, where he treated fetishism with more than his usual severity, some fanatic threw on his naked feet a huge cobra. There are 2 snakes deified by the Brahmin mythology. The one which surrounds the neck of Shiva on his idols is called Vasuki, the other, Ananta, forms the couch of Vishnu. So the worshipper of Shiva, feeling sure that his cobra, trained purposely for the mysteries of a Shivaite pagoda, would at once make an end of the offender's life, triumphantly exclaimed, "Let the god Vasuki himself show which of us is right." Dayanand jerked off the cobra twirling round his leg, and with a single vigorous movement crushed the reptile's head. "Let him do so," he quietly assented. "Your god has been too slow. It is I who have decided the dispute. Now go," added he, addressing the crowd, "and tell everyone how easily perish the false gods." Thanks to his excellent knowledge of Sanskrit, the Pandit does a great service, not only to the masses, clearing their ignorance about the monotheism of the Vedas, but to science too, showing who, exactly, are the Brahmins, the only caste in India which, during centuries, had the right to study Sanskrit literature and comment on the Vedas, and which used this right solely for its own advantage. Long before the time of such Orientalists as Burnouf, Colebrooke, and Max Müller, there have been in India many reformers who tried to prove the pure monotheism of the Vedic doctrines. There have even been founders of new religions who denied the revelations of these scriptures. For instance, the Raja Ram Mohan Roy, and after him Babu Keshub Chunder Sen, both Calcutta Bengalis. But neither of them had much success. They did nothing but add new denominations to the numberless sects existing in India. Ram Mohan Roy died in England, having done next to nothing, and Keshub Chunder Sen, having founded the community of Brahmo Samaj, which professes a religion extracted from the depths of the Babu's own imagination, became a mystic of the most pronounced type, and now is only a berry from the same field, as we say in Russia, as the spiritualists, by whom he is considered to be a medium and a Calcutta Swedenborg. He spends his time in a dirty tank, singing praises to Chaitanya, Quran, Buddha, and his own person, proclaiming himself their prophet, and performs a mystical dance, dressed in woman's attire, which, on his part, is an attention to a woman goddess, whom the Babu calls his mother, father, and eldest brother. In short, all the attempts to re-establish the pure, primitive monotheism of Aryan India have been a failure. They always got wrecked upon the double rock of Brahmanism and of prejudices centuries old. But lo, here appears unexpectedly the Pandit Dayanand. None, even of the most beloved of his disciples, knows who he is and whence he comes. He openly confesses before the crowds that the name under which he is known is not his, but was given to him at the yogi initiation. The mystical school of yogis was established by Patanjali, the founder of one of the 6 philosophical systems of ancient India. It is supposed that the Neoplatonists of the 2nd and 3rd Alexandrian schools were the followers of Indian yogis. More especially was their theurgy brought from India by Pythagoras, according to the tradition. There still exist in India hundreds of yogis who follow the system of Patanjali and assert that they are in communion with Brahma. Nevertheless, most of them are do-nothings, mendicants by profession, and great frauds, thanks to the insatiable longing of the natives for miracles. The real yogis avoid appearing in public, and spend their lives in secluded retirement and studies, except when, as in Dayanand's case, they come forth in time of need to aid their country. However, it is perfectly certain that India never saw a more learned Sanskrit scholar, a deeper metaphysician, a more wonderful orator, and a more fearless denunciator of every evil than Dayanand, since the time of Sankaracharya, the celebrated founder of the Vedanta philosophy, the most metaphysical of Indian systems, in fact, the crown of pantheistic teaching. Then, Dayanand's personal appearance is striking. He is immensely tall, his complexion is pale, rather European than Indian, his eyes are large and bright, and his greyish hair is long. The yogis and dikshatas, initiated, never cut either their hair or beard. His voice is clear and loud, well calculated to give expression to every shade of deep feeling, ranging from a sweet, childish, caressing whisper to thundering wrath against the evil doings and falsehoods of the priests. All this taken together produces an indescribable effect on the impressionable Hindu. Wherever Dayanand appears, crowds prostrate themselves in the dust over his footprints, but unlike Babu Keshub Chunder Sen, he does not teach a new religion, does not invent new dogmas. He only asks them to renew their half-forgotten Sanskrit studies, and having compared the doctrines of their forefathers with what they have become in the hands of Brahmans, to return to the pure conceptions of deity taught by the primitive rishis, Agni, Vayu, Aditya, and Angira, the patriarchs who first gave the Vedas to humanity. He does not even claim that the Vedas are a heavenly revelation, but simply teaches that every word in these scriptures belongs to the highest inspiration possible to the earthly man, an inspiration that is repeated in the history of humanity and, when necessary, may happen to any nation. During his 5 years of work, Swami Dayanand made about 2 million proselytes, chiefly amongst the higher castes. Judging by appearances, they are all ready to sacrifice to him their lives and souls, and even their earthly possessions, which are often more precious to them than their lives. But Dayanand is a real yogi. He never touches money, and despises pecuniary affairs. He contents himself with a few handfuls of rice per day. One is inclined to think that this wonderful Hindu bears a charmed life, so careless is he of rousing the worst human passions, which are so dangerous in India. A marble statue could not be less moved by the raging wrath of the crowd. We saw him once at work. He sent away all his faithful followers, and forbade them either to watch over him or to defend him, and stood alone before the infuriated crowd, facing calmly the monster ready to spring upon him and tear him to pieces. Here a short explanation is necessary. A few years ago, a society of well-informed, energetic people was formed in New York. A certain sharp-witted savant surnamed them La Société des Malcontents du Spiritisme. The founders of this club were people who, believing in the phenomena of spiritualism as much as in the possibility of every other phenomenon in nature, still denied the theory of the spirits. They considered that the modern psychology was a science still in the first stages of its development, in total ignorance of the nature of the psychic man, and denying, as do many other sciences, all that cannot be explained according to its own particular theories. From the first days of its existence, some of the most learned Americans joined the society, which became known as the Theosophical Society. Its members differed on many points, much as do the members of any other society, geographical or archaeological, which fights for years over the sources of the Nile or the hieroglyphs of Egypt. But everyone is unanimously agreed that, as long as there is water in the Nile, its sources must exist somewhere. So much about the phenomena of spiritualism and mesmerism. These phenomena were still waiting their Champollion, but the Rosetta Stone was to be searched for neither in Europe nor in America, but in the faraway countries where they still believe in magic, where wonders are performed daily by the native priesthood, and where the cold materialism of science has never yet reached. In one word, in the East. The Council of the Society knew that the Lama Buddhists, for instance, though not believing in God and denying the personal immortality of the soul, are yet celebrated for their phenomena, and that mesmerism was known and daily practiced in China from time immemorial under the name of jina. In India they fear and hate the very name of the spirits whom the spiritualists venerate so deeply, yet many an ignorant fakir can perform miracles calculated to turn upside down all the notions of a scientist and to be the despair of the most celebrated of European prestidigitateurs. Many members of the society have visited India. Many were born there and have themselves witnessed the sorceries of the Brahmins. The founders of the club, well aware of the depth of modern ignorance in regard to the spiritual man, were most anxious that Cuvier's method of comparative anatomy should acquire rights of citizenship among metaphysicians, and so progress from regions physical to regions psychological on its own inductive and deductive foundation. Otherwise, they thought, psychology will be unable to move forward a single step, and may even obstruct every other branch of natural history. Instances have not been wanting of physiology poaching on the preserves of purely metaphysical and abstract knowledge, all the time feigning to ignore the latter absolutely, and seeking to class psychology with the positive sciences, having first bound it to a bed of Procrustes, where it refuses to yield its secret to its clumsy tormentors. In a short time, the Theosophical Society counted its members, not by hundreds, but by thousands. All the malcontents of American spiritualism, and there were at that time 12 million spiritualists in America, joined the society. Collateral branches were formed in London, Corfu, Australia, Spain, Cuba, California, etc. Everywhere experiments were being performed, and the conviction that it is not spirits alone who are the causes of the phenomena was becoming general. In course of time, branches of the society were in India and in Ceylon. The Buddhist and Brahmanical members became more numerous than the Europeans. A league was formed, and to the name of the society was added the subtitle, The Brotherhood of Humanity. After an active correspondence between the Arya Samaj, founded by Swami Dayanand, and the Theosophical Society, an amalgamation was arranged between the two bodies. Then the Chief Council of the New York branch decided upon sending a special delegation to India for the purpose of studying, on the spot, the ancient language of the Vedas and the manuscripts and the wonders of yogism. On the 17th of December 1878, the delegation, composed of 2 secretaries and 2 members of the Council of the Theosophical Society, started from New York to pause for a while in London, and then to proceed to Bombay, where it landed in February 1879. It may easily be conceived that, under these circumstances, the members of the delegation were better able to study the country and to make fruitful researches than might otherwise have been the case. Today they are looked upon as brothers and aided by the most influential natives of India. They count among the members of their society Pandits of Benares and Calcutta, and Buddhist priests of the Ceylon Viharas, amongst others the learned Sumangala, mentioned by Minayev in the description of his visit to Adam's Peak, and lamas of Tibet, Burma, Travancore, and elsewhere. The members of the delegation are admitted to sanctuaries where, as yet, no European has set his foot. Consequently, they may hope to render many services to humanity and science, in spite of the ill will which the representatives of positive science bear to them. As soon as the delegation landed, a telegram was dispatched to Dayanand, as everyone was anxious to make his personal acquaintance. In reply, he said that he was obliged to go immediately to Hardwar, where hundreds of thousands of pilgrims were expected to assemble, but he insisted on our remaining behind, since cholera was certain to break out among the devotees. He appointed a certain spot, at the foot of the Himalayas in the Jab, where we were to meet in a month's time. Alas, all this was written some time ago. Since then, Swami Dayanand's countenance has changed completely toward us. He is now an enemy of the Theosophical Society and its two founders, Colonel Olcott and the author of these letters. It appeared that, on entering into an offensive and defensive alliance with the Society, Dayanand nourished the hope that all its members, Christians, Brahmins and Buddhists, would acknowledge his supremacy and become members of the Arya Samaj. Needless to say, this was impossible. The Theosophical Society rests on the principle of complete non-interference with the religious beliefs of its members. Toleration is its basis, and its aims are purely philosophical. This did not suit Dayanand. He wanted all the members either to become his disciples or to be expelled from the society. It was quite clear that neither the President nor the Council could assent to such a claim. Englishmen and Americans, whether they were Christians or freethinkers, Buddhists, and especially Brahmins, revolted against Dayanand and unanimously demanded that the league should be broken. However, all this happened later. At the time of which I speak, we were friends and allies of the Swami, and we learned with deep interest that the Hardwar Mela, which he was to visit, takes place every 12 years and is a kind of religious fair which attracts representatives from all the numerous sects of India. Learned dissertations are read by the disputants in defence of their peculiar doctrines, and the debates are held in public. This year, the Hardwar gathering was exceptionally numerous. The sannyasis, the mendicant monks of India, alone numbered 35,000, and the cholera foreseen by the Swami actually broke out. As we were not yet to start for the appointed meeting, we had plenty of spare time before us, so we proceeded to examine Bombay. The Tower of Silence, on the heights of the Malabar Hill, is the last abode of all the sons of Zoroaster. It is, in fact, a Parsi cemetery. Here their dead, rich and poor, men, women and children, are all laid in a row, and in a few minutes nothing remains of them but bare skeletons. A dismal impression is made upon a foreigner by these towers, where absolute silence has reigned for centuries. This kind of building is very common in every place where Parsis live and die. In Bombay, of 6 towers, the largest was built 250 years ago, and the least but a short time since. With few exceptions, they are round or square in shape, from 20 to 40 feet high, without roof, window or door, but with a single iron gate opening towards the east, and so small that it is quite covered by a few bushes. The first corpse brought to a new tower, Dakhma, must be the body of the innocent child of a mobid or priest. No one, not even the chief watcher, is allowed to approach within a distance of 30 paces of these towers. Of all living human beings, Nasa sailors, corpse carriers, alone enter and leave the Tower of Silence. The life these men lead is simply wretched. No European executioner's position is worse. They live quite apart from the rest of the world, in whose eyes they are the most abject of beings. Being forbidden to enter the markets, they must get their food as they can. They are born, marry, and die, perfect strangers to all except their own class, passing through the streets only to fetch the dead and carry them to the tower. Even to be near one of them is a degradation. Entering the tower with a corpse, covered, whatever may have been its rank or position, with old white rags, they undress it and place it in silence on one of the 3 rows presently to be described. Then, still preserving the same silence, they come out, shut the gate, and burn the rags. Amongst the fire worshippers, death is divested of all his majesty, and is a mere object of disgust. As soon as the last hour of a sick person seems to approach, everyone leaves the chamber of death, as much to avoid impeding the departure of the soul from the body, as to shun the risk of polluting the living by contact with the dead. The mobed alone stays with the dying man for a while, and having whispered into his ear the Zendavesta precepts, Ashem Vohu and Yato Ahuvari, leaves the room while the patient is still alive. Then a dog is brought and made to look straight into his face. This ceremony is called Sasdid, the dog's stare. A dog is the only living creature that the Drux Nasu, the evil one, fears, and that is able to prevent him from taking possession of the body. It must be strictly observed that no one's shadow lies between the dying man and the dog, otherwise the whole strength of the dog's gaze will be lost, and the demon will profit by the occasion. The body remains on the spot where life left it, until the Nasa sailors appear, their arms hidden to the shoulders under old bags, to take it away. Having deposited it in an iron coffin, the same for everyone, they carry it to the Dakma. If anyone who has once been carried thither should happen to regain consciousness, the Nasa sailors are bound to kill him. For such a person, who has been polluted by one touch of the dead bodies in the Dakma, has thereby lost all right to return to the living. By doing so, he would contaminate the whole community. As some such cases have occurred, the Parsees are trying to get a new law passed that would allow the miserable ex-corpses to live again amongst their friends, and that would compel the Nasa sailors to leave the only gate of the Dakma unlocked so that they might find a way of retreat open to them. It is very curious, but it is said that the vultures, which devour without hesitation the corpses, will never touch those who are only apparently dead, but fly away uttering loud shrieks. After a last prayer at the gate of the Dakma, pronounced from afar by the mobed and repeated in chorus by the Nasa sailors, the dog ceremony is repeated. In Bombay there is a dog trained for this purpose at the entrance to the tower. Finally, the body is taken inside and placed on one or other of the rows, according to its sex and age. We have twice been present at the ceremonies of dying, and once of burial, if I may be permitted to use such an incongruous term. In this respect, the Parsees are much more tolerant than the Hindus, who are offended by the mere presence at their religious rites of an European. N. Bairangi, a chief official of the tower, invited us to his house to be present at the burial of some rich woman. So we witnessed all that was going on at a distance of about 40 paces, sitting quietly on our obliging host's veranda. While the dog was staring into the dead woman's face, we were gazing as intently, but with much more disgust, at the huge flock of vultures above the Dakma that kept entering the tower and flying out again with pieces of human flesh in their beaks. These birds, that build their nests in thousands round the Tower of Silence, have been purposely imported from Persia. Indian vultures prove to be too weak and not sufficiently bloodthirsty to perform the process of stripping the bones with the dispatch prescribed by Zoroaster. We were told that the entire operation of denuding the bones occupies no more than a few minutes. As soon as the ceremony was over, we were led into another building, where a model of the Dakma was to be seen, We could now very easily imagine what was to take place presently inside the tower. In the centre there is a deep, waterless well, covered with a grating like the opening into a drain. Around it are 3 broad circles, gradually sloping downwards. In each of them are coffin-like receptacles for the bodies. There are 365 such places. The first and smallest row is destined for children, the second for women, and the third for men. This threefold circle is symbolical of 3 cardinal Zoroastrian virtues: pure thoughts, kind words, and good actions. Thanks to the vultures, the bones are laid bare in less than an hour, and in 2 or 3 weeks the tropical sun scorches them into such a state of fragility that the slightest breath of wind is enough to reduce them to powder and to carry them down into the pit. No smell is left behind, no source of plagues and epidemics. I do not know that this way may not be preferable to cremation, which leaves in the air about the ghat a faint but disagreeable odour. The ghat is a place by the sea, or river shore, where Hindus burn their dead. Instead of feeding the old Slavonic deity, Mother Wet Earth, with carrion, Parsis give to Armasti pure dust. Armasti means, literally, fostering cow, and Zoroaster teaches that the cultivation of land is the noblest of all occupations in the eyes of God. Accordingly, the worship of earth is so sacred among the Parsis that they take all possible precautions against polluting the fostering cow that gives them 100 golden grains for every single grain. In the season of the monsoon, when, during 4 months, the rain pours incessantly down and washes into the well everything that is left by the vultures, the water absorbed by the earth is filtered, for the bottom of the well, the walls of which are built of granite, is, to this end, covered with sand and charcoal. The site of the Pinjarapala is less lugubrious and much more amusing. The Pinjarapala is the Bombay hospital for decrepit animals, but a similar institution exists in every town where Jainas dwell. Being one of the most ancient, this is also one of the most interesting of the sects of India. It is much older than Buddhism, which took its rise about 543 to 477 BC. Jainas boast that Buddhism is nothing more than a mere heresy of Jainism, Gautama, the founder of Buddhism, having been a disciple and follower of one of the Jaina gurus. The customs, rites, and philosophical conceptions of Jainas place them midway between the Brahmanists and the Buddhists. In view of their social arrangements, they more closely resemble the former, but in their religion they incline towards the latter. Their caste divisions, their total abstinence from flesh, and their non-worship of the relics of the saints are as strictly observed as the similar tenets of the Brahmins. But, like Buddhists, they deny the Hindu gods and the authority of the Vedas, and adore their own 24 Tirthankaras, or jinas, who belong to the host of the blissful. Their priests, like the Buddhists, never marry. They live in isolated viharas, and choose their successors from amongst the members of any social class. According to them, Prakrit is the only sacred language, and is used in their sacred literature, as well as in Ceylon. Jainas and Buddhists have the same traditional chronology. They do not eat after sunset, and carefully dust any place before sitting down upon it, that they may not crush even the tiniest of insects. Both systems, or rather both schools of philosophy, teach the theory of eternal, indestructible atoms, following the ancient atomistic school of Kannada. They assert that the universe never had a beginning and never will have an end. The world and everything in it is but an illusion, a maya, say the Vedantists, the Buddhists, and the Jainas. But whereas the followers of Sankaracharya preach Parabrahm, a deity devoid of will, understanding, and action, because it is absolute understanding, mind, and will, and Ishwara emanating from it, the Jainas and the Buddhists believe in no creator of the universe, but teach only the existence of Swabhavati, a plastic, infinite, self-created principle in nature. Still, they firmly believe, as do all Indian sects, in the transmigration of souls. Their fear, lest by killing an animal or an insect, they may perchance destroy the life of an ancestor, develops their love and care for every living creature to an almost incredible extent. Not only is there a hospital for invalid animals in every town and village, but their priests always wear a muslin muzzle, I trust they will pardon the disrespectful expression, in order to avoid destroying even the smallest animalcule by inadvertence in the act of breathing. The same fear impels them to drink only filtered water. There are a few millions of Jainas in Gujarat, Bombay, Konkan, and some other places. The Bombay Pinjarapala occupies a whole quarter of the town and is separated into yards, meadows, and gardens, with ponds, cages for beasts of prey, and enclosures for tame animals. This institution would have served very well for a model of Noah's Ark. In the first yard, however, we saw no animals, but instead a few hundred human skeletons, old men, women, and children. They were the remaining natives of the so-called famine districts, who had crowded into Bombay to beg their bread. Thus, while a few yards off, the official vets were busily bandaging the broken legs of jackals, pouring ointments on the backs of mangy dogs, and fitting crutches to lame storks, human beings were dying at their very elbows of starvation. Happily for the famine-stricken, there were at that time fewer hungry animals than usual, and so they were fed on what remained from the meals of the brute pensioners. No doubt, many of these wretched sufferers would have consented to transmigrate instantly into the bodies of any of the animals who were ending so snugly their earthly careers. But even the Pinjarajala roses are not without thorns. The graminivorous subjects, of course, could not wish for anything better, but I doubt very much whether the beasts of prey, such as tigers, hyenas, and wolves, are content with the rules and the forcibly prescribed diet. Jainas themselves turn with disgust even from eggs and fish, and, in consequence, all the animals of which they have the care must turn vegetarians. We were present when an old tiger, wounded by an English bullet, was fed. Having sniffed at a kind of rice soup which was offered to him, he lashed his tail, snarled, showing his yellow teeth, and with a weak roar turned away from the food. What a look he cast askance upon his keeper, who was meekly trying to persuade him to taste his nice dinner. Only the strong bars of the cage saved the Jaina from a vigorous protest on the part of this veteran of the forest. A hyena, with a bleeding head and an ear half torn off, began by sitting in the trough filled with this Spartan sauce, and then, without any further ceremony, upset it, as if to show its utter contempt for the mess. The wolves and the dogs raised such disconsolate howls that they attracted the attention of two inseparable friends, an old elephant with a wooden leg and a sore-eyed ox, the veritable Castor and Pollux of this institution. In accordance with his noble nature, the first thought of the elephant concerned his friend. He wound his trunk round the neck of the ox in token of protection, and both moaned dismally. Parrots, storks, pigeons, flamingos, the whole feathered tribe, revelled in their breakfast. Monkeys were the first to answer the keeper's invitation, and greatly enjoyed themselves. Further on we were shown a holy man, who was feeding insects with his own blood. He lay with his eyes shut, and the scorching rays of the sun striking full upon his naked body. He was literally covered with flies, mosquitoes, ants, and bugs. "All these are our brothers," mildly observed the keeper, pointing to the hundreds of animals and insects. "How can you Europeans kill and even devour them?" "What would you do," I asked, "if this snake were about to bite you? Is it possible you would not kill it if you had time?" "Not for all the world. I should cautiously catch it, and then I should carry it to some deserted place outside the town, and there set it free." "Nevertheless, suppose it bit you?" "Then I should recite a mantram, and if that produced no good result, I should be fair to consider it as the finger of fate, and quietly leave this body for another." These were the words of a man who was educated to a certain extent, and very well read. When we pointed out that no gift of nature is aimless, and that the human teeth are all-devouring, he answered by quoting whole chapters of Darwin's theory of natural selection and origin of species. "It is not true," argued he, that the first men were born with canine teeth. It was only in course of time, with the degradation of humanity, only when the appetite for flesh food began to develop, that the jaws changed their first shape under the influence of new necessities. I could not help asking myself, où la science va-t-elle se fourrer? The same evening in Elphinstone's theatre, there was given a special performance in honour of the American mission, as we are styled here. Native actors represented in Gujarati the ancient fairy drama Sita Rama, that has been adapted from the Ramayana, the celebrated epic by Valmiki. This drama is composed of 14 acts and no end of tableau, in addition to transformation scenes. All the female parts, as usual, were acted by young boys, and the actors, according to the historical and national customs, were barefooted and half-naked. Still, the richness of the costumes, the stage adornments and transformations were truly wonderful. For instance, even on the stages of large metropolitan theatres, it would have been difficult to give a better representation of the army of Rama's allies, who are nothing more than troops of monkeys under the leadership of Hanuman, the soldier, statesman, dramatist, poet, god, who is so celebrated in history, that of India, SVP. The oldest and best of all Sanskrit dramas, Hanuman Natak, is ascribed to this talented forefather of ours. Alas, gone is the glorious time when, proud of our white skin, which after all may be nothing more than the result of a fading under the influences of our northern sky, we looked down upon Hindus and other niggers with a feeling of contempt well suited to our own magnificence. No doubt Sir William Jones's soft heart ached when translating from the Sanskrit such humiliating sentences as the following. Hanuman is said to be the forefather of the Europeans. Rama, being a hero and a demigod, was well entitled to unite all the bachelors of his useful monkey army to the daughters of the Lanka, Ceylon giants, the Rakshasas, and to present these Dravidian beauties with the dowry of all Western lands. After the most pompous marriage ceremonies, the monkey soldiers made a bridge, with the help of their own tails, and safely landed with their spouses in Europe, where they lived very happily and had a numerous progeny. This progeny are we, Europeans. Dravidian words found in some European languages, in Basque for instance, greatly rejoice the hearts of the Brahmins, who would gladly promote the philologists to the rank of demigods for this important discovery, which confirms so gloriously their ancient legend. But it was Darwin who crowned the edifice of proof with the authority of Western education and Western scientific literature. The Indians became still more convinced that we are the veritable descendants of Hanuman, and that, if one only took the trouble to examine carefully, our tales might easily be discovered. Our narrow breeches and long skirts only add to the evidence, however uncomplimentary the idea may be to us. Still, if you consider seriously, what are we to say when science, in the person of Darwin, concedes this hypothesis to the wisdom of ancient Arius? We must perforce submit. And really, it is better to have for a forefather Hanuman, the poet, the hero, the god, than any other monkey, even though it be a tailless one. Sita Rama belongs to the category of mythological dramas, something like the tragedies of Aeschylus. Listening to this production of the remotest antiquity, the spectators are carried back to the times when the gods, descending upon earth, took an active part in the everyday life of mortals. Nothing reminds one of a modern drama, though the exterior arrangement is the same. From the sublime to the ridiculous there is but a step, and vice versa. The goat, chosen for a sacrifice to Bacchus, presented the world tragedy. Greek script here. The death bleatings and buttings of the quadrupedal offering of antiquity have been polished by the hands of time and of civilization, and as a result of this process, we get the dying whisper of Rachel in the part of Adrien Lecouvreur, and the fearfully realistic kicking of the modern Croisette in the poisoning scene of the Sphinx. But whereas the descendants of Themistocles gladly receive, whether captive or free, all the changes and improvements considered as such by modern taste, thinking them to be a corrected and enlarged edition of the genius of Aeschylus, Hindus, happily for archaeologists and lovers of antiquity, have never moved a step since the times of our much-honoured forefather Hanuman. We awaited the performance of Sitarama with the liveliest curiosity. Except ourselves and the building of the theatre, everything was strictly indigenous and nothing reminded us of the West. There was not the trace of an orchestra. Music was only to be heard from the stage, or from behind it. At last, the curtain rose. The silence, which had been very remarkable before the performance, considering the huge crowd of spectators of both sexes, now became absolute. Rama is one of the incarnations of Vishnu, and as most of the audience were worshippers of Vishnu, for them the spectacle was not a mere theatrical performance, but a religious mystery, representing the life and achievements of their favourite and most venerated gods. The prologue was laid in the epoch before creation began. It may safely be said that no dramatist would dare to choose an earlier one, or rather, before the last manifestation of the universe. All the philosophical sects of India, except Muslims, agree that the universe has always existed. But the Hindus divide the periodical appearances and vanishings into days and nights of Brahma. The nights, or withdrawals of the objective universe, are called pralayas, and the days, or epochs of new awakening into life and light, are called manvantaras, yugas, or centuries of the gods. These periods are also called, respectively, the in-breathings and out-breathings of Brahma. When pralaya comes to an end, Brahma awakens, and with this awakening, the universe that rested in deity, in other words, that was reabsorbed in its subjective essence, emanates from the divine principle and becomes visible. The gods, who died at the same time as the universe, begin slowly to return to life. The invisible alone, the infinite, the lifeless, the one who is the unconditioned original life itself, soars, surrounded by shoreless chaos. Its holy presence is not visible. It shows itself only in the periodical pulsation of chaos, represented by a dark mass of waters filling the stage. These waters are not, as yet, separated from the dry land, because Brahma, the creative spirit of Narayana, has not yet separated from the ever-unchanging. Then comes a heavy shock of the whole mass, and the waters begin to acquire transparency. Rays, proceeding from a golden egg at the bottom, spread through the chaotic waters. Receiving life from the spirit of Narayana, the egg bursts and the awakened Brahma rises to the surface of the water in the shape of a huge lotus. Light clouds appear, at first transparent and web-like. They gradually become condensed and transform themselves into Prajapatis, the 10 personified creative powers of Brahma, the god of everything living, and sing a hymn of praise to the Creator. Something naively poetical to our unaccustomed ears breathed in this uniform melody unaccompanied by any orchestra. The hour of general revival has struck. Pralaya comes to an end. Everything rejoices, returning to life. The sky is separated from the waters, and on it appear the Asuras and Gandharvas, the heavenly singers and musicians. Then Indra, Yama, Varuna, and Kuvera, the spirits presiding over the 4 cardinal points, or the 4 elements, water, fire, earth, and air, pour forth atoms, whence springs the serpent Ananta. The monster swims to the surface of the waves and, bending its swan-like neck, forms a couch on which Vishnu reclines with the goddess of beauty, his wife Lakshmi at his feet. Swatha, 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 cries the choir of heavenly musicians, hailing the deity. In the Russian church service this is pronounced swiat, 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 and means holy, holy, holy. In one of his future avatars, Vishnu will incarnate in Rama, the son of a great king, and Lakshmi will become Sita. The motive of the whole poem of Ramayana is sung in a few words by the celestial musicians. Kama, the god of love, shelters the divine couple, and that very moment, a flame is lit in their hearts, and the whole world is created. Later there are performed the 14 acts of the drama, which is well known to everybody, and in which several hundred personages take part. At the end of the prologue, the whole assembly of gods come forward, one after another, and acquaint the audience with the contents and the epilogue of their performance, asking the public not to be too exacting. It is as though all these familiar deities, made of painted granite and marble, left the temples and came down to remind mortals of events long past and forgotten. The hall was full of natives. We four alone were representatives of Europe. Like a huge flower bed, the women displayed the bright colours of their garments. Here and there, among handsome, bronze-like heads, were the pretty, dull white faces of Parsi women, whose beauty reminded me of the Georgians. The front rows were occupied by women only. In India, it is quite easy to learn a person's religion, sect, and caste, and even whether a woman is married or single, from the marks painted in bright colours on everyone's forehead. Since the time when Alexander the Great destroyed the sacred books of the Gebars, they have constantly been oppressed by the idol worshippers. King Ardashir Babashan restored fire worship in the years 229, 243 AC. Since then, they have again been persecuted during the reign of one of the Shakpurs, either Zekand, Ninth, or Gisvan of the Sassanids, but which of them is not known. It is, however, reported that one of them was a great protector of the Zarathustra doctrines. After the fall of Yezdegerd, the fire worshippers emigrated to the island of Ormast, and some time later, having found a book of Zoroastrian prophecies, in obedience to one of them they set out for Hindustan. After many wanderings they appeared about 1,000 or 1,200 years ago in the territory of Maharana Jayadeva, a vassal of the Rajput king Champaner, who allowed them to colonize his land, but only on condition that they laid down their weapons, that they abandoned the Persian language for Hindi, and that their women put off their national dress and clothed themselves after the manner of Hindu women. He, however, allowed them to wear shoes, since this is strictly prescribed by Zoroaster. Since then, very few changes have been made. It follows that the Parsi women could only be distinguished from their Hindu sisters by very slight differences. The almost white faces of the former were separated by a strip of smooth black hair from a sort of white cap, and the whole was covered with a bright veil. The latter wore no covering on their rich, shining hair, twisted into a kind of Greek chignon. Their foreheads were brightly painted, and their nostrils adorned with golden rings. Both are fond of bright, but uniform colours. Both cover their arms up to the elbow with bangles, and both wear saris. Behind the women, a whole sea of most wonderful turbans was waving in the pit. There were long-haired Rajputs with regular Grecian features and long beards parted in the middle, their heads covered with pagris consisting of, at least, 20 yards of finest white muslin, and their persons adorned with earrings and necklaces. There were Maratha Brahmins, who shave their heads, leaving only one long central lock, and wear turbans of blinding red, decorated in front with a sort of golden horn of plenty. Bangas, wearing 3-cornered helmets with a kind of cockscomb on the top. Kachis, with Roman helmets. Bilis, from the borders of Rajasthan, whose chins are wrapped 3 times in the ends of their pyramidal turbans, so that the innocent tourist never fails to think that they constantly suffer from toothache. Bengalis and Calcutta Babus, bare-headed all the year round, their hair cut after an Athenian fashion, and their bodies clothed in the proud folds of a white toga virilis, in no way different from those once worn by Roman senators. Parsis, in their black oilcloth mitres. Sikhs, the followers of Nanaka, strictly monotheist and mystic, whose turbans are very like the Bilis, but who wear long hair down to their waists, and hundreds of other tribes. Proposing to count how many different headgears are to be seen in Bombay alone, we had to abandon the task as impracticable after a fortnight. Every caste, every trade, guild, and sect, every one of the 1,000 subdivisions of the social hierarchy, has its own bright turban, often sparkling with gold lace and precious stones, which is laid aside only in case of mourning. But, as if to compensate for this luxury, even the members of the municipality, rich merchants and Rai Bahadurs, who have been created baronets by the government, never wear any stockings and leave their legs bare up to the knees. As for their dress, it chiefly consists of a kind of shapeless white shirt. In Baroda, some Gaikwas, a title of all the Baroda princes, still keep in their stables elephants and the less common giraffes, though the former are strictly forbidden in the streets of Bombay. We had an opportunity of seeing ministers, and even rajas, mounted on these noble animals, their mouths full of pansupari, betel leaves, their heads drooping under the weight of the precious stones on their turbans, and each of their fingers and toes adorned with rich golden rings. While the evening I am describing lasted, however, we saw no elephants, no giraffes, though we enjoyed the company of rajas and ministers. We had in our box the handsome ambassador and late tutor of the Maharana of Udaipur. Our companion was a Raja and a Pandit. His name was a Mohanlal Vishnulal Pandya. He wore a small pink turban sparkling with diamonds, a pair of pink barège trousers, and a white gauze coat. His raven black hair half covered his amber-coloured neck, which was surrounded by a necklace that might have driven any Parisian belle frantic with envy. The poor Raiput was awfully sleepy, but he stuck heroically to his duties, and thoughtfully pulling his beard, led us all through the endless labyrinth of metaphysical entanglements of the Ramayana. During the entr'actes we were offered coffee, sherbets and cigarettes, which we smoked even during the performance, sitting in front of the stage in the first row. We were covered, like idols, with garlands of flowers, and the manager, a stout Hindu clad in transparent muslins, sprinkled us several times with rose water. The performance began at 8 p.m, and at 2:30 had only reached the 9th act. In spite of each of us having a punkah-walla at our backs, the heat was unbearable. We had reached the limits of our endurance and tried to excuse ourselves. This led to general disturbance, on the stage as well as in the auditorium. The airy chariot, on which the wicked King Ravana was carrying Sita away, paused in the air. The king of the Nagas, serpents, ceased breathing flames, the monkey soldiers hung motionless on the trees, and Rama himself, clad in light blue and crowned with a diminutive pagoda, came to the front of the stage and pronounced in pure English speech, in which he thanked us for the honour of our presence. Then new bouquets, pansuparis and rosewater, and finally, we reached home about 4 a.m. Next morning we learned that the performance had ended at 6:30.